Madeira, Manchester, Madrid, Turin, and Manchester again. Aguero! Goal for South Africa! Goal for all Africa! Roma have risen from their ruins!
Welcome back to episode 16 of the On a Yellow Football Podcast.
The post says 17, but you know,
Okay, so
technically it's 17.
We
but
have to quickly discuss something. So we did a podcast episode last week, and if you were listening on the radio, you heard it completely fine. You heard everything that we had to say, and we had a lot of good points to say. So, I took the footage, I uploaded it to my computer, and I was about to, put it on to Premiere Pro where we edit. And, I found that the audio was, I don't know how to describe it, fried? Is that a good word for it?
it was kind of just blasted on the DBs.
Yes.
Something went wrong somewhere in the process. Not entirely sure.
I don't really know what exactly happened, but it is really bad audio. And I tried to fix it. I put it to, I used this sound panel. I was, changing things. I was adding reverb to our voices. I even put it into Adobe Podcast Editor to see if they could fix it. And it proved not to work, definitely. It would skew a lot of our words, and it didn't really sound great. So that's why it's really, this is like episode 16, 17. But, anyway, it's called New Rules.
But before new rules,
Yes.
we have some big news to share, some new content on the up and up for our podcast, a new opportunity, a new partnership. Do you have anything to speak on that, Liam?
Do we want to say who we're partnering with? Or?
I mean, it's only a matter of time until the content is
True.
there. So, rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay, so we are partnering with In Season's Best or Off Season's Best. They kind of run through depending on the time of the season when the season's happening. So we're working with In Season's Best, which is a group that is created by William Akio and Elijah Adakubi, who are trying to promote the game within Canada and shed light on the Canadian ballers that are balling around the world.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity. We're both super excited to get working with them.
For sure.
Providing even more content for the podcast listeners. And even outside of the content for off season and in season, we have some other things in the works and in the plans for content as well.
We were discussing about this podcast and about the On a Yellow brand, if we could call it that. We started this journey only a couple months ago, and now we're getting opportunities to work with other unique people that are trying to have the same mission as we are, and that's promote the game within North America. But we were thinking possibly on doing some match day vlogs, highlighting the fan bases that
some interviews.
Yes.
Ask the fans their opinions on things. Just get out in the field in the world of football. Maybe try and get a media pass or something. Ask some questions to footballers directly after the game, potentially even.
Exactly. We really want to build this. And I think part of that, though, is to create something for you guys listening or you guys watching on YouTube. It is something that we really want to just grow our content, but we want to grow with our fans, if we could say, the 28 subscribers that we have.
We want to expand what we're doing out from just the podcast and the shorts that we post. Yeah. make some more fun videos, some shorter form content. Not every video will be 1 hour long going forward. Podcast episodes, yes. Other content, probably around the 20-minute mark, potentially even shorter than that, just depending on like the type of content it is.
For sure.
But it should be exciting times ahead for sure.
Exactly. To the fans listening and or watching, feel free to comment on our social media. Just basically some things that we could maybe do for content. We have ideas, but getting the fans' perspective, I think, would be a good idea.
If there's things you want to see us do, make sure to let it be known, and
Exactly.
we'll do our best to try and make that happen.
Exactly. And just again, thank you for everyone that is following, subscribed, watches our content, watches our full or listens to our full episodes. Your watch time hours and listening hours are much appreciated, and they allow us to grow something that we just love to do, and we're really excited for what this kind of future will bring. And like we said, because we're so new into this, we are open to a lot of different types of content. So feel free to let us know what you might be looking for or you might be wanting to watch, and we will try to we'll try to create that for you.
And now moving on from our personal news, there's some pretty big football news as well in the last week. Some pretty interesting stories, some points being dropped. I know Liam has something pretty interesting he'd like to start this one off with.
Yeah, rule changes. I think in the world of football, we see rule changes a lot more than we think. I can look back to rules against time wasting, rules in the sense of goalkeepers, the pass back rule, goalkeepers not being able to pick up the ball after it got passed back to them by a player on the outfield. And we're seeing some more rule changes and trials, if you will, and those trials are happening on home turf, home soil, and it involves around an offside rule that's been kind of a little bit controversial, and it's made by a manager that I never thought we would have this guy and the Canadian Premier League in the same sentence, and that is Arsene Wenger's offside rule, called the daylight offside rule.
Do you know why it's called the daylight rule?
I do. So basically why it's called the daylight rule is because this is what the rule is. So for everyone listening, basically just broad information is that this rule is going to be utilized in the CPL's upcoming season. And it's a new offside rule that has been kind of debated throughout the footballing world. It's been banned, or not banned, but disallowed to be used or disproved to be used in UEFA competitions, so like the Champions League, but they got the go-ahead to do a trial within the Canadian Premier League. Now, what is this rule, you may be asking? Well, it's called the daylight offside rule, like I said earlier. And basically what it is right now, our system of offsides is you're offside if a body part is over or past the defender, like a body part that you can score with, and even an arm, I think.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right?
I don't believe it. Any part of you is past the defender.
If it's past the
currently.
defender, you're offside. What the daylight offside rule is those moments in which VAR kind of painstakingly looks at the line to see if the guy's over or not and draws all the lines, is trying to remove that, trying to make the game more fluid by basically making it saying that you are only offside if there's a physical gap between you and the defender, or called daylight.
If all of you has passed the defender,
Yes.
It kind of reminds me of offside in hockey, with the blue line being a physical plane, and if you have any part of you technically on that plane, you're not offside. So it's a very similar thing to the current offside rules in hockey. So I think that's kind of even more of a tie to Canada, with hockey being such a popular sport here, and testing out the new rule where it's similar sort of in a way to hockey offsides. That's the way I see it, at least.
Yeah. So, with this new iteration, this trial, what's your thoughts on the CPL being the center of this?
Well, I think it will, because people will be interested to see how it works. It'll bring potentially some new eyes to the league. If there's controversial calls on and a reel or something gets posted, goes kind of viral, it can only help the league in terms of visibility, I believe. But it could be bad visibility as well if it really does not work well, the new offside rule. And I think it will increase the scoring in the league this year. Because I remember last season for the Cavalry, there was so many times when Gauthier Antigne would look like he was on a run, but he was just barely offside by the refs. The refs saying that he's offside. And if those now with the new rule, he would have had so many more runs and potentially scored a lot more goals in games we were already winning 2 or 3-0 potentially. And I think it will increase the goal scoring in the league, which I think is a good thing, being a bit more exciting. It never hurts. But I am worried because there is no VAR in our league, it's going to be incredibly difficult for linos and refs to make the correct calls when there is no video replay for them to check, because it's so much more difficult to tell now, because some lino might forget and call an offside when he's not offside, and it could cause drama, in my opinion.
It could. I think I agree with what you said. It brings a lot of eyes to our league that wouldn't necessarily be watching our league. Right. This is a trial of a system in which has been debated around football since Arsene Wenger brought it up. I just think that, it's hard. I really like the system. I think it makes sense. I think the debates against it are saying it gives too much. It gives a lot of forwards more of. Well, I'm forgetting the word here.
Well, all I know is that I saw a couple memes when it was kind of announced that Kylian Mbappe is going to retire as the GOAT, and that he's hoping that it goes well and becomes a real thing. Even though he didn't say that, he has so many goals called off for marginal offsides, and I think with the new rule, he would definitely have a lot more goals.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the players that, get a lot of offsides. They're the players that play in between the lines and try to use their speed to their advantage. A lot of these players would love that system. And, a lot of people says it gives an advantage to strikers more than defenders. But, I think it's not that much of a different system than the system we already have. I think what it kind of tries to answer is the question of, the fluidity of the game. If the game's constantly stopped because a VAR has to draw his lines, then, I think that it makes it easier. I think putting it in a league that doesn't have VAR, I think it makes sense because technically, I mean, it's easier for the lino now because instead of getting those minuscule details, like if the arm is slightly over, now it's, his full body has to be over now. So I think it makes it easier for them.
But in theory, it's exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Where now it's the opposite side. Does his foot still behind the defender or not?
I think so, because it's daylight. So there has to be a physical gap or
but
daylight.
How big does the gap have to be?
Exactly.
That's the thing. It could be 1 millimeter.
Exactly.
And it's just as difficult to call that.
I think it's
as
really
before, in my opinion.
I don't think it's going to change much. I think it might give some goals that would have been offside in the previous system. It might give them and grant them as a goal, but I just don't think that it's not really going to change much. I feel like they've talked about this system in ad nauseum, and I think that I mean, it's a system, but it's not straying that far from what the offside rule is already.
I think it'll promote defensive stability.
Yeah.
Force defenders to, pay a little bit more attention when they're at the back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe play a little deeper into their half and not give strikers those kind of
Yeah.
opportunities. But I saw somebody complaining about this rule where they said it's going to go back to early 2000s football with low block being very prevailing in the league.
But if you think about that, early 2000s football, yes, you had the low block. You had the Jose Mourinho kind of park the bus strategy. But the goals that people were scoring were insanely good because they were shooting from outside the box because they couldn't, break through their line. So they were actually shooting from the box and shooting from outside the box, rather. And they were scoring magnificent goals. So it's like, from a football viewer perspective, I mean, if I'm watching my team, I want my team to score more goals than the opposite team. But if I'm watching as a neutral, I want there to be more goals in the game. I love football. I love football for what it is. Obviously it's not going to be as high scoring. I don't really want to see high scoring games in the sense of like 6-6, right? But I want to see games in which I just want to see games that have good goals, good goal scoring. And I think that it will promote that.
I think it'll force teams into spending more time in their training for set pieces as well.
Yeah.
Because if teams go to a low block and you get a foul potentially outside of the box, you get a corner, you're going to want to be really well practiced in that because it might be one of the best opportunities to score in a system like that.
I mean, exactly. I heard someone complaining that now, players and coaches, have to adapt and that they can't utilize like a high press and stuff like that. But like, I just think that, in football, like I said earlier, rules changes happen all of the time. And, the big ones, like the pass back rule, for example, the footballing world all adapted and they all changed their tactics. And that's what happens. Like, we wouldn't be talking about Gangan pressing, or, tiki-taka football if football didn't evolve and tactics were changed and manipulated. And, I think that a new offside system might allow the games to be more fluid. We love football for its fluidity. We love back and forth gameplay. And right now, I feel like there's a lot of times in which players, want to try to delay time. And there's also players that get goals that are disallowed. I always look back to the Manchester Derby, for example. Manchester United would have 2 goals added on to their tally of 2-1. They would have 2 goals added on or whatever because they got 2 goals that were disallowed in that game for really minuscule offsides. So I think that, it could possibly make the game a bit more fluid and possibly fun to watch because if you think about it, like I said earlier, it can promote players to shoot from outside the box more and promote players to play creatively because obviously if the defenders are playing in a low block, you have to be more creative and you have to be a little bit more clinical with your passes and your shots. So it could make them, train harder for that and the game interesting. I think, you look at 90s football and I think that the game now they're not as, like, I wouldn't say they're not as talented. I think the game has evolved again, but I think that, they're more rigid to structures and systems than they were in the 90s. In the 90s, it seemed like they kind of evolved from street footballers where they could express themselves creatively on the pitch. So I feel like having a new system like that, they're not going to be worried about calls or whistles, and they can play more about more about being clinical and making highlight reels. And I think that it just makes the game way better to watch. And I think I'm definitely open to see now.
Well, I have to ask
yes, for sure.
Is the new rule the death of the offside trap, or is it something that you could potentially see teams leaning more into trying to create that gap, that daylight, so that it does get called offside?
Good question. I think that it's hard to tell. Like I said, the game evolves. I heard someone say like, oh, it's the death of the offside trap. And I'm like, the game is evolving. It's like, wouldn't you want tactics to evolve? Tactics have to evolve because once people start, getting like with Pep Guardiola's system, for example, people now understand Pep Guardiola's system and they start, they find holes in that system to beat the Man City team. So I think that the game is always evolving. I think it's going to be harder to do an offside trap because you're taking a big risk now. Because obviously you have to make sure that guy is way offside. And I think players now are going to, like strikers especially, strikers can use this new system to their advantage. They know it. Like a team, I don't think can do an offside trap because a player is not stupid enough to, the team, the opposing team is pushing forward and, they're not stupid enough to be all the way behind them. I think the offside trap works now because, strikers are always in between that line. So I think, possibly it could work, but I don't really, I think in theory it could work, but I think that strikers and professional strikers are really sneaky when it comes to that. And now the offside trap is harder because instead of just a minute distance between the player and the defensive line, it's now having to have daylight. So I think players are going to understand that, strikers especially, and if they see an offside trap, they're just going to make themselves go a little bit further back, right? Strikers aren't stupid enough now in today's game to be caught out that easily. So I think that would definitely be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's going to be the death of the offside trap just because it will be so much more difficult. Especially with
For sure.
with teams potentially relying on pacier wingers.
Yep.
To try and break the line, get a ball to them so they can run down and in behind the defense, and it'll be a lot more difficult for defenders, especially a center back, to keep up with that pace. And I think it'll force deeper lines for defenses in general, unless you're really deep in the opponent's end, and then maybe you'll see kind of a push up of the defense. But I think it will be a difference in play style for sure, and I think different archetypes of players will become more successful under that potential new rule.
Exactly. Like you see a bunch of strikers that like to play, in between the lines. I feel like they can use that to their advantage. Toby Orsevsky loves to do that. He loves to be around, be that advanced forward role. Not necessarily a dedicated number 9, but a guy that can play fluid and kind of advanced forward role. And that could be really, really helpful. Gauthier Antigny is the same way. Just to name Cavs players, but there's other players around the league I think that would really like that. I think, I think the system, it's good to trial it here, but I feel like you need to trial it with a league that has VAR, right? Like MLS would be a perfect option. Because MLS is in North America, right? The North America game is perfect to trial things because, while the other leagues and the top 5 leagues in Europe are in their off season, we're in our actual season and full season. We're in season, if you will. So I think it's really good to have, you can get eyes on it because people are more focused on looking at these games than they are focused on their own games. So I feel like that's really important. Now, I think with this rule change, I like it, and I think that definitely having it in a system that has a VAR type system could be interesting to see because I think VAR doesn't necessarily have to draw lines anymore; it just has to be there for replays. So I think that I'm taking it and I'm excited to see, how it looks. Now, moving on, we talked about the new offside rule, but there's a couple other new rules that are going to be implemented in our home soil again, but in the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And these rules, try to address a lot of time-wasting issues and a lot of kind of on-field issues. It's not necessarily changing the offside rule, but it's changing the way players play and the way that players, attempt to delay the game. So just to kind of like do an overview. It's the World Cup, one of the biggest competitions in the world, probably the biggest competition in the world. And it's going to be seeing these rule changes So a lot of eyes are on this game now. And it's pretty cool. So all these were approved by the IFAB, or the International Football Association Board. They had a meeting and they created these rules that will be implemented in the 2026 World Cup. One of them involves countdowns for goal kicks and throw-ins. So if the referee deems that the player that has possession is taking too long with his throw-in or the goal kick, he can initiate a 5-second countdown.
Well, I feel like that's kind of already a thing.
It's
though.
already a thing, but it's
Not
less.
without a countdown.
It's less. So in football right now, there's like a 30-second rule. Like he goes down a 30-second countdown. This is going to a 5-second countdown. So it's already a thing, but they've made it less time. And yeah, if he thinks that it's too long, so it's more than 5 seconds, they get more than 5 seconds to, of course, do the goal kick or do the throw in. It's just if it goes past a certain amount of time that the referee deems is too long, he can initiates a actual countdown. So I think he
it's kind of trying to address kind of last World Cup.
Yes.
Where there was exorbitant amounts of added time in every match.
Exactly. It's trying to address that. It's trying to make the game more fluid and less stoppagey. It doesn't want to add stoppage time because we talked about, you just said the World Cup is they were 10 minutes of added time. And I think that just kind of ruins the game. Especially if your team is winning by a small margin. You don't want 10 minutes. And I think 10 minutes is a bit too long. And, after the 5-second countdown's done, if they still haven't released the ball, failing to meet this, right, throw-ins is possessions given to the opponents. So they get a throw-in. So it's like if you do an illegal throw. Then goal kicks is resulting in a corner kick. So if the goalie does, takes his time, instead of getting a card, I don't know about that, but they get possession away and they might get a card for time wasting. So it's trying to, make the game more fluid, but also try to address time wasting.
We're just going to see more players with the ball near the corner flag.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because obviously, if the ball's in play, then that is an example of time wasting. It's the same thing with hogging the ball, but now with goal kicks, set pieces, throw-ins, all of them now are you have to take them with a certain amount of time, which I like because in my opinion, sometimes the goalkeepers, they just kind of keep the ball, and they keep the ball for as long as they're allowed to until the countdown, I think it's 9 seconds or whatever, initiates after a certain amount of time. So, it's supposed to address issues of time wasting, and I like it. I feel like time wasting, even if your team is the one time wasting, just makes the game really boring. And I think that teams should play to the final whistle instead of trying to frustrate the opponents by time wasting and then causing a 10 minutes. There's also other rules kind of talking about kind of time wasting. So substitutions, this one was a really interesting one. So substitutions now, the players getting substituted on and substituted off only have 10 seconds to initiate and complete this process. And if the player has basically if the player fails to come off the pitch quick enough, that player that's being subbed in can't go on the pitch for 10 seconds. Or a minute. They can't go on the pitch for a minute. But they're down to 10 men because the person getting subbed off has to still be subbed off. So basically, you're down to 10 men if you don't substitute quick enough. So it's trying to address the issues with the guy.
Of people taking the shin pads out.
Taking the shin pads
on
out.
The walk,
clapping around, looking around, thumbs up, saying goodbye to their players.
10 seconds is pretty fast. You're kind of forcing them to just book it off the field at that point.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 seconds is a better.
Maybe, but I think what it creates is an environment in which players, yes, they're getting subbed off, but instead of walking off, they jog off. They high five the guy that's getting subbed on, and they go on their day, right? And they go on with the game, and I think that is important. But I think this is crazy. If that player is not quick enough, then they have to, wait 1 minute, and the team is down to 10 men because that person that's getting subbed off still has to be subbed off. So I feel like it really, they're trying to really enforce this one. And I think it could possibly be a good thing. I think there's a lot of times where players, like we said, take off their shin pads, acknowledge the crowd,
The
and
fourth official will finally have a role in the game.
exactly, the fourth official could time. He could have a stopwatch with the maybe like the the countdown is on
Countdown
the
big board.
board, saying you have this much time, and if not, then yeah, too bad. Your guy's gonna have to sit a minute. Now, there's also stuff for on-field injury treatments. So basically, the player, if he gets on-field injury kind of assessment, like he stays on the ground and the paramedics have to like come out and the medics have to come out onto the pitch and receive treatment. He has to receive treatment. That guy has to now stay off the pitch. He has to walk off the pitch, but he has to stay off the pitch instead of 30 seconds. He has to stay off the pitch for 1 minute. So it's trying to reduce issues of guy goes down, receives treatment, and he's perfectly fine.
Force him onto the stretcher off the field.
Yeah. So, and I think it's 30 seconds in the Prem. I think in the Premier League it's 30 seconds they have to be off for. Now it's a minute. So it's trying to still reduce that issue. So I think these issues are good. They're not too drastic. I think what they do is they help the game be more fluid, they help the game be more fast-paced, and they reduce the issues of like plus 8 to 10 minutes of added time at the end of the game. And those will just make the games better, especially in the World Cup and international games that, are really tense. The teams want to win, and a lot of the times they will go through ways of time wasting to get that objective. And I think that, I just think it just makes the game faster, but it also makes the players actually play football, right? We're watching football to see football. And if you can't keep a lead, then, maybe you're not the team to win the World Cup. And I feel like keeping the lead while you have the ball and you're hogging the ball and you're also trying to score as well, maybe you're being more timid, kind of passing it around. I feel like that's better than, going down because you have a cramp and you're still wasting time. Now, I think injuries or whatever still are going to happen. I think that players are still going to go down, but now, it's trying to hinder a player going down and being down to 10 men, especially in close games for a minute is that's one drive where a player could be there to help his team. So I feel like these are decent changes. They don't change the game much and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on those changes, Zach?
Yeah, they're not really new rules. It's just kind of cutting down the time that they previously allowed in half on some cases, sometimes even more.
Totally.
Or extending things. I think the only one that I'm not 10 seconds to get off the field seems a little bit fast.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a lot of the time players take a lot longer than 10 seconds.
Might be. I don't know if that's like a solid you have 10 seconds or that's like a light 10 seconds.
What if you're doing a 3-man sub and none of them come off in the right amount of time? And then
well, that only gives them like 2 seconds to see the board and like run off. But I
maybe
think
they'll just go off to the closest side.
Yeah, I think it's the closest side. You go off and then you go around. But that sometimes is not great for the player because he gets berated by the fans. But I think that's just how the game of football is sometimes. There's more changes. They really hit home in this meeting. I don't know if it's an annual meeting or if it's like every certain amount of years. I think it's like every certain amount of years. So I feel like they really come in and this football association like really hits home at issues.
What happens if the goalie's the one that goes down injured?
I think
you're not going to force him to go stand on the sideline for.
No, I don't think so. I don't think they do that now. I feel like it's just on-field players other than goalkeepers. Because sometimes goalkeepers go down injured. I think they get special because obviously it's the only position. And losing a goalie is like, I think, a circumstance in which it's like gives the other team a even bigger advantage than just 10 men. There's one more kind of thing, and there's VAR changes. And I would say it's mostly like it's widened how VAR is used to more things. So now VAR is used for corners, second yellows, and incorrect cards that are given out.
Well, I feel like they already used them for second yellows.
Apparently this is what
Or
they're
did they
trying
only
to do.
use them for straight reds?
I think they only used them for straight reds. I think it depends because remember we're talking about the FIFA World Cup. So in certain leagues, the boards like the FA and all that stuff, they all have different rules that they integrate, and each league has a different rule, right? And I think now the FIFA is creating this rule for the World Cup to just see how it is, and then they'll push it out to other leagues. I think corners are a good idea. So there's been moments in which VAR is not used for corners, or either corners or I think it's corners or if the ball went over the line before it was crossed type of thing. So like a moment in which last World Cup was Japan against Germany, where that ball was like either out or not out, depending on how you looked at it, with Japan scoring the goal to beat Germany. And I think, I think it makes sense. I mean, if you have it for goal line technology, you might as well have it for corner. Like it's like if it goes out or not. Second yellows, I mean, makes sense. It just makes the game better. You don't want to give out, red cards are.
You don't want to give out a red card without potentially, being 100%.
That's
sure.
what I mean. Red cards are like moments that are pivotal in a game that can switch the kind of momentum of a game exponentially. And then incorrect cards is another one. So when a ref gives out a yellow to a guy or a red to a guy that didn't tackle or didn't do the offense or whatever, or that gets turned down. And I think that is for yellows as well. I mean, yeah, I don't think you're going to use that often. Refs are usually pretty good at giving out cards correctly or as they see correctly. I think giving out someone a card for a tackle that they do, maybe some people say that's not a card, but that's not really an incorrect card. I think like an incorrect card would be giving someone a denial of a goal scoring opportunity red card when it wasn't a red card because the Dogzo offense was not there. So I think that's good. But like I said, like rule changes, I think they are a thing that happens in the game. We talk about the rule changes, the offside rules, everything. And I just think, it's something that happens in the game. It's why we love this game because the game is constantly evolving. And it's constantly changing. The players are different. The way we play is different. The tactics are different. And just the overall look of the game is different. So I feel like these rule changes are something that just happens in the game. And I mean, they're not indefinite. Like you can always change them. You can always change them back. You can always change them to a different system. They're just trialing them out. And I think these systems or these new rules, especially for the World Cup, aren't crazy. The World Cup is a competition that happens every 4 years. And I think that these ones aren't kind of straying from the soccer or football identity that much. The IFAB also is thinking of holding, or they're going to hold consultations to create measures relating to two things. And they were two things that were related to major events that happened really recently in the world of football that don't really have any rules in the rule book for. One of them is players covering their mouths with their jerseys. They're going to hold a consultation of how to stop that or what to do with it. In my opinion, I think if you're going to make a rule for that, you just make it bannable, like a red card automatically. Because in my opinion, you don't like it if it's to talk, like not to just like wipe your nose or something.
But if a player just does this and they say something, how are you supposed to know what's different and what's...
I don't know. I think, it's addressing the moment of Prestiani and Vinicius Jr. And, I think...
just depending on how long you hold it.
I think it's depending on that, maybe depending on circumstance. Like if it's a heated altercation and someone does that, obviously they're trying to say something in which they don't want the TVs to catch. So I feel like, those are moments in which, you should get a red card and maybe further investigations to see like what you actually said or something like that. Now, another one is players leaving the pitch on protest. So during the AFCON final, Senegal leaving the pitch in protest to the referee's decisions while they were facing Morocco in the AFCON final. There's going to be some, I don't know exactly, like, granted, they're just holding consultations to try to figure out measures to try to stop or lessen these events happening. I think the shirt one is a definite one I think you have to address now. But I think the players leaving the pitch on protest, I feel like that's just a fluke. I mean, that doesn't really happen often. So, I think measures put in place. I mean, sure, get a measure just to, fill the rule book with something to try to cover everything. But in my opinion, the most important one, if you're going to do a consultation based off of those two, would be players covering their face while speaking. I think it depends on circumstance, like we said, on that rule of what the rule would be. It depends on what they're actually doing, because if they're talking to someone directly in like a heated altercation, then that is when the rule should be implemented. But I think if they're just like covering their face to wipe their nose or something, I think it's also the timing. Like if they have it over their face for a long period of time and they're saying something, then maybe you should address that. But if they're just like there for 1 second, just wiping their nose, just yada yada, then I think it's okay. But I think, like I said, rule changes, they're part of this game, and the game always evolves over time. And I think as fans, as players, and coaches, we need to look at these rule changes, and we need to just evolve our game, evolve how we watch, and kind of expect rule changes, but also bring them in with positivity, because I think that in the end of the day, these rule changes are trying to make our game even better than it already is.
Well, I think it's time to move on from
for sure
the very exciting rules of the game onto some actual games.
Yes. So, just to kind of move on, within the cold, dark winter of Norway, it shines a bright light, and that bright has illuminated the Champions League
bright light,
stage.
Or are they terrifying Vikings?
They could be, and they've kind of illuminated the Champions League stage, and that is Bodo Glimt, the Norwegian dark horse. Yeah, the David versus Goliath moments that we talk about all the time in this Champions League.
Well, I think, they got a pretty favorable draw. They got Sporting.
Do you think that
they could make it to the round of
eight? Do you think that? I don't think they're not going to win, but do you think that they could get to past the round of 16?
Yes,
I think
they
could.
No, they could win. Their home form is incredible.
True.
If they can get the first leg at home, it could be game over for whoever.
Well, if we look at their last four Champions League results, so the story about Bodo Glimt is that they were at a 0.3% chance of actually making it to the knockout stages, because they had to beat Man City and all these other teams. The first game that they had after that 0.3 was Dortmund. They tied Dortmund dramatically at the end. Then they go and play against Manchester City. They beat Manchester City. Then they go play Atletico Madrid. They beat Atletico Madrid. And then they play 2 legs against Inter Milan, and in the round of 32, and they beat them in both legs.
Well, the crazy thing is they've won 5 games in a row before Man United did. And 4 of them were Champions League games.
It's kind of crazy,
And the crazier thing is they're not even the Norwegian champions.
No, Viking is the Norwegian champion.
They finished second.
Yeah, Viking
want to play against Viking.
No, I like if
Viking would be a favorite.
If Bodo and Glimt is this good in the Champions League,
how good are the champions of Norway?
How good is Viking? That's what I'm wondering about.
They gotta be insane.
Like Viking might be the best team in Champions League history if they come into the Champions League stage. But I think Bodo and Glimt, or Bodo Glimt, they talk about, how is Bodo Glimt winning? And a lot of people are kind of theorizing. And I think it's work rate. this team outworks every team they play. And they also use their home pitch to their advantage. They're playing in Norwegian winter in the far north of Norway. You can see the northern lights while you're playing the game. And they play on AstroTurf. A lot of players don't play on AstroTurf. And you're playing in a small, cold atmosphere. And I think that, teams and players underestimate
What
Bodo
an
and
away
Glimt.
day. What an away day
It's-
that would be.
Yeah, we talked about content. We're going to Norway. But, I think definitely, they outwork everyone. They play 4-3-3. They play a low block. In almost their last 3 games, they didn't lead possession at all, but they use their chances wisely. They play a low block. They let defend. But they really try to consume players. They're really hard to play against. Like I said, their work rate is so high. They're always trying to trying to attack, and they don't really let a lot of space for the players to flourish. And Inter really didn't do that. Like, they didn't really play well against them.
Well, the second leg, their goalie really saved them at the end of the game.
Yes.
Yeah, Inter had a ton of shots on net.
I will say definitely, we look at Norway or we look at Bodo Glimt's team, they have their holes. They
obviously-
take really risky chances, really risky plays. And if you're a team that, carries, they don't have a lot of possession, you really need to make sure that your defense is tight. And you also need to make sure that you take the chances that you get. And I think they've done a good job with that. But if you're playing against, better team, we talk about better teams. They played against Inter and some of the best teams in the Champions League. But if you play against a team that really knows how to defend well, and plays against you well, a lot of teams are going to be watching Bodo Glimt now. It's going to be harder for Bodo Glimt to really make a crack through certain teams.
Well, they obviously don't have the financial capabilities that basically any other team in the Champions League has. I'm sure the Norwegian broadcasting is not bringing them much money. They haven't even been in the league that long, really.
No, they went to administration in 2010, and then they got I think the fishing town brought their team back to life.
They've been in, I believe, the top division for around 10 or so years again, and they almost always finish first or second.
Yeah.
With their 1 or 2 times being when they were freshly promoted.
They
where
make Europe,
they
too.
weren't there. They're pretty constantly in Europe. They played in the Europa League last year.
And, lost against Manchester United, just to put that in there.
Didn't they play Tottenham?
Played
Or was-
Manchester United.
Was that a different?
3-2. I mean, it could have been in the league phase.
True. I'm not too.
We didn't face them in the round of 16.
I'm not too well known on the Europa League from past seasons.
Conference League guy?
Not really. All I know is that Crystal Palace is not that good.
But, Bodo and Glimt, they rely on fast breaks, like I said. They have such a work rate. Did you know that they're the top team in the Champions League right now for distance covered, with 123 kilometers covered in every game?
Dang.
It's a bit skewed due to the fact that it also counts these round of 16 games, but they still have a lot of running. They cover a ton of distance, and they're also second in clearances too, with 30.9. So I think, they really want to clear the ball. They really want, I think the clearances are because they play such a low block in which they allow the team to attack them, and they're really good at getting and attacking on crosses and getting them out and clearing them away. I think they're always looking to attack off possession. I think something we saw that, we weren't expecting is how technically gifted some of these homegrown talents are. We talked about Bodo Glimt. They only have 2 players on their team that aren't from Norway in their first team 11.
Yeah, their goalkeeper is Russian, and their striker is Danish.
Yes.
And the rest of their starting 11 is Norwegian. They have a couple other Danish guys on the team, but that's it.
And most of them are homegrown too. So, they've really done well of creating a great team. And,
I was looking, kind of at their transfers in and out,
yes.
and they buy a lot of players from other teams within the league. They sell players to teams in the league. They kind of help out the talent pool in the Norwegian league with their academy alone.
And it's just great to see. Like, I mean, they're pivotal. They've really, I think, a lot of people underestimate Bodø Glimt. And I mean, that makes sense. I mean, if you're a team like Inter Milan, obviously you made it to the finals last year. You would expect to beat that team, and they underestimate it. I think it's really hard to play those cold nights in Norway, especially on AstroTurf, and in an atmosphere that, like, obviously you're not used to playing on and not used to playing in that weather. So I think that, that is a factor in them beating them. But I think, like I said, we saw in a lot of their games, especially their game in the San Siro, where they had a beautiful build-up play goal, that this team is actually technically gifted. They're not like a team that's just there because, they got lucky within the playoffs to get there. They're a team that's actually really technically gifted, and although they don't get a lot of possession during games, their work rate alone helps them, and they attack every time they get possession, and they're always looking to attack. A lot of the stuff is facilitated by their defenders passing it into the midfield, who kind of pass it outside to the wingers. There's been a lot of good players on their team. One of them has been Hogg, who's been like a standout of their team. Hogg, and they have their Danish striker. Hogg, yeah.
Spelled differently.
But spelled differently, yes.
Haugehogh.
Yes, exactly. And Hogg, the winger, has 6 goals in the Champions League right now, and the other one has 4. So they've really picked it up actually in the knockout stages, which is really cool to see. And I think it's really good. All right, so for the past we've talked a lot about new rules and Bodø Glimt. I just want to kind of briefly touch on Real Madrid. Real Madrid have dropped points. And they've dropped points. They've lost their past 2 La Liga games against Getafe and against who was it against that they lost before? They
shouldn't have made that manager change.
Osasuna they lost against too.
Maybe they shouldn't have made the manager.
Do you
change.
think he's do you think Arabola is on kind of he's kind of on a chopping block here, or?
I don't think he's gonna last long.
No, there's something to me that
something.
If you talk about
his
if
system is not meshing with the players,
if Xabi Alonso got sacked, then Arabola's it's not looking. I know he's a good player, but I think
Former
discipline's
West
the problem. I talked about these past 2, like I think these past 2 games, discipline's a problem. And in the game against within these 2 games, they have 8 yellow cards and 1 red in 2 La Liga matches. And the red one was because of dissent at the end of the game. It's frustration. But again, also, I think discipline's one thing, but I just think it's missed chances. A team that has majority of the possession, they're being too timid with it. They're thinking that they have this in the bag, and when they mess up once, the team like Getafe took their chance and they scored. You look at the game against Osasuna, they had 15 shots, but only 5 of them were on target, and they had 61% possession in that game. In contrast to the Getafe game, they had 77% possession, 18 shots, and only 7 were on target. So, I think it's missed chances. It's being too timid. And people have been saying, oh, Real Madrid's not doing well because their big name players like Mbappe and Bellingham aren't in the lineup right now because they're injured. But again, you have to say, like, this is Real Madrid we're talking about. Not like a team that really doesn't have that much star players and losing their star player really hurts the team. This is Real Madrid, right? And I think, if you have Vinny Jr., Rodrigo, and all these other players on your team, Tchouaméni and players like that, you shouldn't be dropping points against Getafe or Osasuna, right? And now this makes the gap to continue to be 4 points behind Barca, which is not that much, but these are two games that could be definitive in giving Barca the title this season if Barca continues their form.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation where, they put on, one of their star kids, Mastuano,
Yes.
and now he's going to be banned for, I'm not sure what their rules are for straight reds.
It's one game.
Okay, it's different than the Premier League then.
No, it's the same thing with the Prem.
No, the Prem's 3 games.
It's one.
Then why'd Todibo get 3 for his red?
I-
Because he grabbed the guy to the neck?
Is it like if you get more than one red card, or is it just straight reds R3?
I believe it's 3 games for straight red because Christian Romero,
Yeah.
when he got his second one this season, he missed 5 games because of it.
Okay, maybe it is 3, and then it's just 1 if you get 2 yellow. That makes sense. Yeah, he only misses 1 game.
Yeah, it's
And then Dean Huijsen also misses the game as well because he got a yellow. And he got too many yellows, and now he's going to miss a game. There's another player on their team as well who has the same too many yellows that game. So they're missing a couple of star players on their team. And I think discipline's a problem. I think also it could be a factor of, they think that they're the best and they underestimate teams. They play too timid. They play too complacent. Complacency could be a factor.
the argument of, the players missing, it's kind of valid.
Yeah,
But I think, they assumed they were still going to win this game. So
Exactly.
They didn't put the proper players in.
Getafe's in a
Where,
relegation or near relegation right now.
Their starting striker who played the entire game was Gonzalo Garcia.
Yeah.
And in the midfield, they played 18-year-old Thiago Patrit, or Pitarch, or whatever his name is. And I think, they kind of just assumed that this was a win against Getafe, no matter who they put on the field.
Yeah.
And they tried to fix it, putting on Mastuano, putting on Rodrigo, putting on Brahim Diaz, and it just didn't work.
No. And I think that, Real Madrid fans shouldn't be, they're not happy. I mean, they're booing their players off the pitch, which, I don't necessarily think is the right thing to do. I think it's a team that's in a rough spell. It's just you just don't think that a team like Real Madrid would be in a rough spell with the players that they have on their team. And you would have expected that they would have had someone on their bench that could fill an Mbappe injury.
Well, that should have been Brahim Diaz.
Yes.
As the starting striker, but they are very injured right now. Camavinga, Militao, Asensio,
Yes.
Ceballos, Bellingham, and Mbappe are out. And I'm looking at the injuries. Camavinga, kind of funny here. He has a tooth injury,
Oh.
and he's out until mid-March
Oh, wow.
due to it. So he's out for 2 weeks because he got punched in the tooth or something.
Yeah, no, that's it's painful.
He's gonna look like Jack Hughes.
Yeah, maybe you will. But yeah, I just think definitely Arabola, he did say that after the game that Madrid's still in a race, and I think that's still fine. They are still in a title race. They're only 4 points behind, and they're with the same amount of games. So realistically, they are still in a title race, and they said we are trying to get the title.
They just made it more difficult for themselves.
Yes.
Than it needed to be.
And they're still in the Champions League. So it's another one there. I don't think they'll win. And they're also still, no, actually, no, they're out of the Copa del Rey now because they lost against a League Two side.
Budget.
Yeah. And I just think it's a frustrating season for Madrid fans and the Madristas. I just think that definitely they have to be better in the future. And only time will tell. But I think if they get players back and the players that they really like back, I think, anything's possible. Mbappe was a big blow to lose, especially with Mbappe right now being in prime form, ready for the World Cup.
I imagine, they have Mbappe for that game.
He could probably get
4-0 Madrid.
Yeah, he can probably get a goal. Most likely because they really missed the clinicalness of an Mbappe and kind of the assertiveness.
The playmaking ability, the ability to make a run, draw defenders off. Not even necessarily, he doesn't have to be the one to, be carrying the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But to put himself in a position where a defender has to pay attention to him makes it easier for the other players to attack. And missing that and putting on, an academy player who hasn't really played a ton of minutes, he won't be able to provide that same kind of
Yep.
world-class talent.
Yeah. I mean, we're comparing an academy to a prime Mbappe,
Obviously,
right?
You have to.
Yeah. I mean, hey, he is in the striker position, so, you do have to
You're
compare.
in the striker position for the most popular team in the world.
Yes.
You should be able to generate something.
Yep.
And he didn't.
I know. All right. So we're going to have to end this episode here. Can I get a send-off, Zach?
Bonjour, au revoir, and have a great rest of your day.
I love to hear it. And yes, thank you, everyone, for listening and watching.
And keep an eye out for some brand new content.
Exactly. We'll see you later, guys.